want to begin by apologies. We have the Lord Mayor, Anna Reynolds, and Councillor Will Coates. Two apologies we have. Number one, confirmation of minutes. If someone would like to move, please, that the minutes.
So moved.
All in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Number two, consideration of supplementary items. Is there any? There is none. Number three, indication of pecuniary and conflict of interest. Are there any? No, thank you. Number four, transfer of agenda items. No. Number five, planning authority item, consideration of items with deputations. We do have two deputations, 612 and 6.1.3, 51 Smith Street, and then St. John's application. So we'll take them first. So we'll, as per our meeting procedures. So if someone would like to move?
So moved.
Move. All in favour? Thank you. Carried unanimously. Number six, committee acting as planning authority. Again, draw the elected members' attention to Rule 25 of the meeting procedures that we are now acting as planning authority. So we start off with 6.1.2, the first item, which is the 51 Smith Street, and we have the applicant Rob and Kim Woodcock. So if you come to the front with the mic, please, and you have 5 minutes, and when it's about 30 seconds left, just in the table there would be fine. Thank you. Yeah. When it's 30 seconds left, I'll let you know that you have 30 seconds remaining. Thank you very much. Take a seat. You can sit down. Yeah, no problem.
My name is Kim, and I was born and raised on a farm where I learned a hard work ethic. I have raised 6 children virtually on my own, and they have all grown into very successful adults. They all lived in one of these terrace houses during the school week, but since they were built in 1895, there would have been much larger families living there. These properties are now on the Tasmanian Heritage Register, and I have also done a lot of hard work gradually restoring them back to their glory days. Sympathetic renovations. All the original features, including lath and plaster ceilings and walls, which I would rather not risk being damaged by tenants moving furniture up and down the steep stairwells. They are not affordable accommodation, nor is it my responsibility to supply such. Apparently the Hobart City Council was supposed to release land a while back for housing, but ultimately it is the responsibility of state and federal governments. I do have a social conscience. For over 15 years, I have made regular donations to educate and obtain identity papers for young girls in third world countries. I also help homeless youth in Australia, the MS Society, as this affects one of my sisters, and Diabetes Australia, because my daughter has suffered dreadfully from type 1 from the age of 11. As well as financial support, I am the president of the Hobart CWA, where our main fundraising is directed to young mothers and babies who have no family support. And at the moment, I am trying to establish help for families affected by suicide in rural areas of Tasmania. One farmer dies from this every 10 days in Australia. I also have voluntary positions in several other organisations. Next time you go to the cafe in the hospital, you will notice a plaque where my aunts paid to totally refurbish the hospital back in the day. Councillor Dutta, you are on record as saying that you only vote on the legalities of an application. I also have had sound advice that I have a good case for being discriminated against since this whole process started. The Planning Department at Council have approved this application as I have not contravened any of the requirements for said application. So I ask all of you to have an open mind and to be fair and just and vote accordingly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Kim. Greatly appreciate it. Any questions? Councillor.
Thank you. Kim, this is obviously an application for a visitor accommodation permit. Do you have any immediate plans to use the property as visitor accommodation, or is this a just in case thing?
I have the property currently advertised for rental, for long-term rental. It has been vacant since April and I have not had any tenants so far, but it is open for long-term accommodation in the immediate future.
Right, so just to clarify, you've got it currently offered for rent on the long-term market and it's been sitting empty for the past few months?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No question. I have a question, Kim, for you. From memory, this application came on the 3rd of May last year with 6 of them all together. Is this the same one now coming one by one, or am I mistaken?
I put in the original application to save both myself and council time and money. It was rejected on hysteria and I was harassed no end on this application, so under advice I withdrew, and as an option now I am, because this one has been vacant, I am putting in an application for this.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Kelly.
That's Elliot, yep.
Oh, sorry.
If
Apologies.
this application was to be granted, do you foresee yourself going back to long-term rental in the future, or will it be forever short stay?
That would be a business decision as a business person. At the moment, I am very open to having it rented for long-term accommodation, yes.
And one final question. I note in the representations that some of the neighbours had concerns about people having a barbecue or smoking. Have you ever had long-term tenants before that smoke or have barbecues?
All the time.
Thank you.
And I have never had any complaints from anybody.
Thank you. Any other questions? No, thank you very much, Kim. You can now go back to your seat. Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. Now, are there any questions to the acting director? Elliot.
Councillor, my question through you, Chair, to the director. Councillor Dutton just referred to this application being the same application, but my understanding this would be a different application, that an application was withdrawn and this is a new application for one. Is that correct?
That is correct. That the earlier application was for 6 properties and this one is only for 1 property.
Yeah, so they're different applications, not the same. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just a question. I know the answer, but
Here we go.
sorry. Through you to the director. If a person's got short stay accommodation approval, they can at any time they wish have a tenant in there for a long period of time and still retain their status. Is that correct or incorrect?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions? No, I have a question to the director. Now, maybe there's a slight misunderstanding. When I made that point that 6 of the units came all at once, and now it's appearing one at a time, that's the distinction I'm making. When the 6 came, it was refused. So my question is, on the basis of planning grounds, they were refused. And my question is, why is it then that this time around it's not refused on those grounds?
Thank you, Chair. just to clarify, my understanding is that the earlier application was actually withdrawn after receiving some suggestions that it wouldn't be approved by the planning committee. At that time, officers did have concerns about having a block of 6 and with the potential for those 6 to be booked out by one group, for example, and for that to potentially operate as a bit of a party zone across those 6 properties. So that was one of the concerns of the officers at that point. And it may well be that if the 6th one in the row is applied for conversion to visitor accommodation, that concern will re-arise, but it certainly does not arise on this application.
Thank you very much.
There's a question on that through you to the director. Are these all conjoined, interlocked?
Yes, these ones are. Oh, sorry, this one is up one end of the 6, and there are 2 that are approved down the other end of the 6.
My question is, because you made a statement about they could have a party, are they interlocked at the door?
Through your chair, no, they're not.
Separate?
No.
They're all separate?
They're all separate.
Okay. No,
Any other? Councillor Kelly.
Just for you, Chair, to the Director, this application, there is absolutely nothing that can be contested in the planning scheme with this application.
Through your chair, that's my strong advice, yes.
And would there be anyone who would, if this was going to be, would anyone represent council to take this on at Tascat?
Through your chair, from previous inquiries, I can confidently say that we will not be able to obtain an expert to support a refusal of this application.
Thank you.
refusal.
Councillor Persaud.
Thank you. Just one question to the Director, just a clarifier for new councillors and potentially for people that are watching. Performance Criterion Clause 3.1E P1 has a statement in D that it must not have unreasonable loss to residential amenity having regard to retaining the primary residential function of an area. Is it correct that this has been tested and that visitor accommodation has been considered residential use? And is that where the planning scheme is falling over?
Through you, Chair. So elected members may recall there was an application in Sandy Bay Road where the 3rd out of 4 properties was applied to be converted to visitor accommodation. That was refused, recommended by officers for refusal, and it was refused. On appeal to Tascat, that was overruled. The council has appealed that decision to the Supreme Court, and that decision is that process is still underway. So we don't yet have clarity from the Supreme Court about residential function, what that means and what the limitations are. Certainly in the current situation where the properties are on either end of this block of 6, I don't think that that's a sufficient basis to refuse this application.
Thank you. Councillor Bloomfield. Alderman Bloomfield, sorry.
Given that this particular application is a very standard application, that the application was well known in advance that it would be approved, that there is no ability, because we have done this so many times in this room. I try to fathom why it is that this was picked up and put to this room, because we're going to have the same conversation and the same outcome no matter what. And the only reason I can imagine that this has occurred is to obfuscate and make it difficult for the applicant, because today it's not considered in flavour, and I'm not sure that's really appropriate to have done in this council. So I feel that not only should this debate effectively cease simply because we've done this, we've talked about this, we know what the outcome is, it's the same every time we do this, and we are effectively trivialising a very large and difficult application that these people go through to their detriment every time. Our city is about everyone. It's not about picking and choosing who we like today. I am really concerned that I keep seeing these, and it has to stop. And I honestly think that this debate has done its time and that we really should be moving forwards to completion and just voting.
Harvey.
Can you just clarify? I think there were 8 representations and that's why it's here.
Through you, Chair, that's correct.
Yep.
Thank you.
And
Councillor Salt.
thank you. Just to clarify that there is a threshold of 6 community representations that triggers it coming to planning,
Through you, Chair, yes, that's correct.
and every one of the Airbnb or short stay accommodations that we have seen has triggered more than 6.
Through you, Chair, no, that's not correct. There was a period where they were systematically called in.
Under this council or the previous?
Through you, Chair, I think actually it was the previous body of elected members.
Thank you, Director. If I may, look, my thoughts on this is that within the constraints of the planning authority as we meet tonight, that there's no ability for us to refuse this application. However, the ongoing narrative of the triggering of these coming to us through community concern is showing us that the planning scheme and the performance criterion aren't meeting the standards that the community want. And that's the only point I can make tonight, is that once again the performance criteria and the planning scheme are not hitting the community expectations. But we are obliged to vote as per the planning authority and as per the scheme, and per that scheme this dwelling should be approved. And
So are you moving that we accept the recommendation?
yeah, I can move that, that's fine.
All right, now anyone else wants to speak to that?
I just wanted to clarify, is it also true though that Councillor Dutta requested this application to come to the council meeting, isn't it?
Please. It is very clear that when an application is made, if you have more than 5 people making representations, we are entitled to call it in. It had 8, and I was making inquiries. If it wasn't 8, then I would call it in.
Right, yeah, it was just at the last meeting you said you requested it to come.
Yes.
So just in terms of general comments, along a similar vein as Alderman Bloomfield, I do feel for the applicant, particularly in this perspective, because they have definitely been persecuted, in my opinion, by this council, and they've well and truly copped more than their fair share of the anti-short stay movement. I think that we all know, and we repeat time and time again, what's relevant to planning applications, and the standards that the community want in their planning applications, that some community members might want from their applications, is not relevant. We judge applications on the planning scheme of today, not what is wanted. So I think we have to bear in mind, especially over events over the weekend, that persecuting people can have real consequences, and there are individuals behind this application as there are behind them all, and we have learnt much more about the applicant today. So of course I'll be supporting the recommendation because it's a legally compliant application and people should not be punished for putting in legally compliant applications.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think that the applicant has been vilified. I know many instances I've seen on social media, and I've heard a lot of other cases. And by council keep dragging this into this forum is setting up a platform for that continue. We know that every time we come here, this application ticks all the boxes. We've got nothing that we can argue against the planning scheme agreeing with this application. But yet, we drag this person into this chamber or via by this coming to the scheme, knowing full well and knowing that it's going to drag her through the mud even more. I think it's quite disgraceful to the level this has now gone. And if people don't like the planning scheme, well, get off your hind quarters and go through the appropriate channels to change it, because there are ways for members or the members of the public or whoever wants to make representations to the relevant authority to change it. And this is not the place to do it, and it's not the place to bring an innocent member, particularly this ratepayer, who's a decent person, contributed so much to this community, into a forum like this. So I think it's quite appalling, and if this happens again, this council's got to have a good hard look at itself. I support the officer's recommendation to approve this application. Thank you.
Any other? No, let me make some comments. Firstly, point number 1. Remember, according to the rules, we have more than 5 people. If there are more than 5 people who make representations, by process, we'll have to bring it in. So therefore, this application is here because there were more than 5 people, there were 8. Not simply because a particular elected member has called it in. Point number 2 is that it is the right of every elected member as a matter of process to call it in, if an elected member wants to. Point number 3, when this particular application came to us in May last year, there were 6 of them altogether. And hence, questions were asked by those who are not in the planning committee, ratepayers out there who don't understand the processes and procedures, inquired as to why now it is being approved when altogether it wasn't approved. And therefore, they are entitled to hear that. And the final point I want to make is this, that this is not dragged in here. It is simply a matter of process that we're debating. And if we look at it, when it came as 6 units altogether collectively, it was the staff who recommended refusal based on the planning ground, and it is very clearly stated that it was based on performance criteria 3E, A, B, C, and D, and also refused performance criteria 3E, P2, A, B, C, and D. So it wasn't the elected members working on their particular pet issues, as it were, but because it was refused and recommended as such, hence we voted for it. Today it's a different matter. I'm very clearly supporting this because it has met the criteria clearly. But if the staff were to make recommendations to refuse, then I would look at it differently and interpret things differently. Thank you very much. I put that now.
Chairman, I just want to make a point. So, if a matter's going to come here when it goes through the proper processes as you speak, I'm quite comfortable with that. So, the next short stay accommodation that comes to council without the 5 required people objecting means that the comments you made would be indifferent. So let's wait and see if it comes again, eh?
Absolutely, that's the point. But it is the right of the elected member to call it if they want to.
I understand it's the right of elected members, but the point is, you did call it in, irrespective of the 5, right? So be honest on that, right? And if we want to let process happen and the officers can approve a short stay accommodation, and we're going to get a roundtable discussion as Alderman Bloomfield has stated, we're just going to go through a process for no reason because, we're going to have a debate. The matter will get either refused or approved. If it gets refused, it's going to go to the tribunal, put more pressure on our staff. The reality is the current planning scheme is what it is. And I take the point of Councillor Pasalt, and I've argued this before and I've actually done it over the years. I've pushed for changes and amendments to the planning scheme, and that's the way to do it. We can't do anything at the moment, but if you want to, we're waiting for the new planning scheme anyway to come forward anyway. Once that comes into play, people don't like some parts of it, push for amendments in the planning scheme and go through the process. At the moment, it is what it is. But let's be honest. If we want to call it in, if we want to call the next short stay accommodation in, well, we're playing politics.
Thank you for your comments. Let me restate the reality and the facts. And the facts are these, that if there are more than 5 people, we are able to call it in. May I finish?
Thank you.
Point number 2 that we need to take into consideration, that every elected member has the right to call it in as a matter of process. That's all. And apart from that, if you do something different, then there's a different point. Thank you very much. I put that to vote now. All those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Those against? No. Hands, please.
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Passelt, Councillor Kitsos, Councillor Loberger, Alderman
Against?
Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you very much. Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next one. 613 St. John's application. So we have the representative and the applicant as well. So we'll, Dr. Diane Snowden, are you here? Please come in the front, and as I said in the other application, you have 5 minutes, and when there's about 30 seconds left, I'll let you know. Thank you very much.
I think I'll stand if that's...
That's fine, no problem, if you want to.
My name's Diane Snowden. I'm a historian and the president of the Friends of the Orphan Schools. I want to state at the outset that I am not opposed to the Southern Mental Health Beds development and Tasmanian Eating Disorder Service being part of St John's Park. But I strongly believe that there are alternative, less sensitive and more appropriate locations in the precinct which do not have the potential to disturb human remains and can therefore be developed more quickly. Firstly, just a bit of background. I founded the Friends of the Orphan Schools in 2007. For 17 years, the Friends have meticulously researched the history of St John's Park, including the burial ground site. We know the names of those that are buried there, who they were, when they died, and in many cases, why they died. Many were the children of convicts. Others were Aboriginal children from Flinders Island, removed from family and country. There were also paupers, many of whom were ex-convicts from the Newtown Charitable Institution, later St John's Park Hospital, which closed in 1994. They were buried there because they were poor, vulnerable and lost family contact. There are two important points I want to make before I address the specific performance criteria that are part of the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme. The first is that there has been no community consultation. The second is that although the Department of Health has initiated a master plan for St John's Park Precinct, this development application is being considered outside the master plan process. As part of the performance criteria, I particularly want to consider the Historic Heritage Code E13.5. There are no references to the Conservation Management Plan, CMP, in the assessment. The assessment claims, page 271, there is nothing within the planning scheme that prevents development on this site. But there is in place a conservation management plan for the site that should have formed the basis of an initial assessment of the potential impact on the heritage values of the place. Why hasn't the CMP been consulted? It is within the application requirement of the planning scheme, E13.5, for the CMP to be considered. I quote, "Could I get a glass of water, please?" I quote, "In addition to any other requirements, the planning authority may require the applicant to provide any of the following information if considered necessary to determine compliance with the performance criteria. A CMP is the first document listed. The CMP clearly states that no construction is appropriate for former cemetery grounds. Part of the problem we have been facing is that there is no clear delineation of the burial ground boundaries. The Department of Health has been saying for some time that it is undertaking a ground penetrating radar survey to establish boundaries, but this has not yet been done. As well, archaeological work done in 2019 for the first iteration of this development needs to be reviewed. We just don't know where the burials are. There does not appear to be a clear plan in place to deal with human remains if they are found. Nor can I see the Tasmanian Heritage Council practice note on cemeteries in the assessment. The Forster Monument is a landmark element which defines the site as a burial ground. Drawings submitted as part of the planning report clearly show that the scale and proximity of the proposed buildings dominate and detract from the Forster monument and encroach onto the burial ground, as shown in the photo montage. E3.71 states that demolition must not result in the loss of significant landscape elements that contribute to the historic cultural significance of the place. The burial ground is not just an archaeological site, but it is a landscape element.
30 seconds left. You've got 30 seconds.
Marked by the Forster monument and understood as the absence of buildings. Finally, the high level of heritage significance of St John's Park precinct requires rigorous assessment and best practice heritage management according to the Borough Charter. There is a prudent and feasible alternative to this proposed development. It does not have to be on the burial ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Diane. You may take a seat there because we might have a few questions. Thank you so much for your representation. Thank you, Councillor.
Can I just ask whether your organisation has had any collaboration or discussions with the Palmer community in Hobart?
Can you please speak to the microphone if you don't mind?
Yeah,
Thank
sure. So just to repeat the question, I've just asked whether or not this group has had anything to do with community consultation or discussions around the burial ground with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community.
We've had some discussion in the past and we're seeking further consultation with them because it is an issue of interest to the Palawa.
Councillor Ben Loberg.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just have to ask the question this way, sorry. I'm just interested, the site that the building is going on appears to be replacing a previous building in a car park. Are you saying that the burial ground maybe was under those previous structures?
Yes, yep. If you look at the old maps, it goes right up to the road, the St John's Avenue Road that's at the top of the car park. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Snowden. I was just wondering what your interpretation was of the impact over the Sunday school, given the topography. Obviously, you've raised your concerns regarding the graves, but do you perceive there to be impact over the Sunday school, or are you happy with that relationship?
Because of the bulk and size and spread of the proposed development, it'll be visible from the Sunday school. Yeah, so there is a concern there. But the main concern is what it does to the Forster monument, which is listed with Monuments Australia, and the way that it's no longer visible as a landmark element on the burial ground.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. If it was proven during the initial scrapes or excavation for a building that there was absolutely no graves below the footprint of this new building, would you be happy for that to happen, beyond some of these other concerns you have?
The thing about graves is you don't know where they are until you find them. I know that there was an archaeological assessment for the 2019 version of the development application, but and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but it only went to 300 metres. Now, the Friends of the Orphan School had done a ground penetrating radar survey in conjunction with GHD and the University of Tasmania, but only a small section where we knew that there'd been headstones, so the graves were likely to be there. 600 metres to a metre, the soil was turned over and very hard to read. So a 300 metre excavation is not going
300
to...
millimetre.
Millimetre, God, yes. 300 millimetre excavation is not likely, given the disturbance that's taken place on the burial ground, to show coffins or human remains.
But if the applicant did find graves during the process in careful excavation, and it was stopped and reassessed, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if it was done carefully and no graves, absolutely proven in the excavation process that there were absolutely no graves on this build site, would you be happy then for the building to proceed?
Yeah, with respect, I think that's unlikely. We
But,
know
yeah, not prejudging that though.
there are better places for the development. Sounds a bit weird, but if I were in a mental health facility, the last thing I would want to be looking at is a graveyard.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, but I was just sort of trying to
And
get in my head.
there are alternative sites at the top of the site, up near the old rectory, behind St John's Bowling Club, tennis court, and they can go up much more quickly without having to worry about whether there are human remains there or not.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? No questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Diane. We have also Scott Garland from the National Trust. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Dutta. I speak for the National Trust, and I don't want to cover the same ground as Dr. Snowden, but our views are fairly aligned. We feel that it's been a very inadequate application and assessment process. You know, we've heard today that we actually don't know the dimensions of the cemetery. We don't know where the graves are. There's master planning for the site underway. It's not completed. There are potential other sites for mental health facility, well, for the new health facilities on the site. And we feel that Council really doesn't have the evidence it requires to make a decision in favour of this development, quite simply because of the inadequacy of the process to date. In relation to the cemetery, I think it's very unfortunate that the cemetery is being treated as open land. You know, the cemetery did have the Forster Memorial in the centre, which still survives, but it also had a limited number of graves, it had fencing, it had eucalyptus trees. So these items were subtracted from the site in the 1960s, but, you know, with proper research, they could come back. The Trust has just recently supported the Friends of the Orphan School in nominating the orphan school, the St John's Precinct, for the National Heritage List. I mean, we regard this as a very significant list with very strong foundational narratives for Australia, particularly for the harshness of the convict system and how the underprivileged were dealt a very, very rough hand. And of course, the saddest thing about the site is the connection with the deportation of Tasmania's first people to Flinders Island. You know, the children were quite heartlessly taken to this site that was known to have a high mortality rate, and, you know, there are Aboriginal children buried in that cemetery. So, and in relation to the question of whether there'd been consultation with the Palawa people, there was a representation submitted on this development by AJ King from Oka Rain Proprietary Limited, so councillors should be aware of that. So, I mean, it is a significant site for Tasmania's continuing First People. So, as Dr. Snowden's mentioned, the Conservation Management Plan for the site was not really consulted in the development of the application or the assessment. You know, Borough Charter principles are that we should really understand the significance of the site, the heritage values embodied in the site before making decisions and going forward. You know, St John's Park is a very large site. Dr. Snowden mentioned a number of other sites where the new facility could be located. The Trust sees this as a great potential loss of opportunity if we build on this site. You know, once you build on the site, you've demolished part of the cemetery. You know, there's no getting the original dimensions of the cemetery back. You know, excavating and finding graves means that there's no point of return to make a decision to retain the site of those graves in the original site. You know, it's a pointless waste of an opportunity. You know, it's a marvellous historic site. People who go to the Cascade Female Factory hear all about the orphan schools. You know, there's a very strong narrative there of mothers losing their children to the orphan school, the real fight that they had to reunite their families. I mean, it's such a, it's a heart-rending story of our early colonial period, but it's not only heart-rending, it's actually significant, and it's telling the story of our society. So let's not lose the opportunity of retaining the cemetery in its full dimensions. Let's find another site for the new facility.
Thank you very much. Now, any questions? Councillor Luberg.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, I'll just have to ask the question this way. I'm sorry, Scott. I attended Campbell Street Primary School, which is a gravesite for 5,000 convicts and pre-settlers. And there's a large number of parks around Hobart that are also former cemeteries. I'm just wondering at the different sort of approach that we're having here today with this particular cemetery and why it's different.
I think it is different because of it has a narrative that goes to the operation of the convict system in Tasmania, and it also has a narrative that goes to the attitude of white Tasmania to the First People, in terms of the children being removed. I mean, that's really, part of the National Heritage nomination is that it is the origin of the stolen generations. So I think, yes, there are other cemeteries around Hobart, and yes, they've got quite compelling stories, but we do think that this site, the orphan schools, the church, the cemetery, and the landscape as a whole, is of national significance.
I'd ask one more question,
yes.
Chair. It's pretty clear that the planning on St John's Park has been a schmozzle for many years. There's all sorts of different buildings everywhere. Some of them are pretty ugly. I mean, the laboratories, for instance. I guess I'm just wanting the National Trust's opinion on how that all fits together with this seeking to sort of list the site, and yet there's all these modern buildings that are pretty ugly, let's face it. Yeah.
Well, I think the way forward is, to understand the heritage values of the site and undertake a master planning process that, could, identify less sensitive sites to put new buildings on, such as this one, and identify which buildings might face redundancy into the future. Yes, it is a fantastic site, but Tasmania's beauty is such a draw card for tourism, and Tasmania's really compelling history too has a role in the tourism economy. And we shouldn't be making decisions that actually compromise the opportunity for heritage to be an economic driver for Tasmania into the future.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. This site, from the commentary yourself and Dr Snowden have provided, is significant, but for some reason Tasmania has not viewed it that way over 2 centuries. I was just wondering, in your view, the St John's site, the Sunday school, the orphanage, the church and so on, are they comparable to the UNESCO-listed heritage sites in Tasmania in terms of your Port Arthur, your Cascade Female Factory? Is this in the same category, or is this in a different category?
I personally, the Trust would see it as being in the same category. It's always been very difficult to get things onto the national list and then onto the World Heritage List, because you do need the owner's consent to do that. So the female factory in Parramatta in New South Wales, which is rather more intact than the female factory here in Hobart, didn't get onto the list the first time round, but the community agitation was there, and the Department of Health in New South Wales relented. It took a long time to give approval for it to go onto the national list. But yes, the St John's Park is absolutely exceptional. The landscape design, in itself, the buildings, it's such a multi-layered site and such a poignant site because of that human dimension. I really do think, if the gates opened and we could get it onto the national list, we surely could argue for it to go onto the World Heritage List into the future.
Just a follow-up question, Chair.
Please.
So the impediment to that has historically and remains the landowners who don't wish to progress that notion, or is it more convoluted and complex?
It could be. Well, I mean, getting these places recognised takes a huge effort, and all power to the Friends of the Orphan School for really raising the profile of the site. But I mean, and I wish the Trust was in a stronger position to push how important the site is. But I think it's extremely important, and it should be on the World Heritage List in the twinkling of an eye.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I'm interested in your view about how you can reconcile the two periods, the colonial period, the burial area, the new facility. Is there a way in your mind that you can bring those pieces together to create some sort of reconciliation that would lead to the development on the site, and also some sort of way of Health Department supporting a nomination for national listing going forward, that they would be part of that nomination?
Yes, that would be ideal. Ideally, that would come out of the master planning process, and of course, under the planning scheme, you can call for documents such as conservation management plans to be updated, in order to bring a higher level of thought to, higher level of consideration to the heritage values of a site. I mean, St John's Park, it's always had a health association from the 1830s onwards, so we're not saying that, you can't put in any more buildings on the site, but I mean, surely a talented architect should really jump at the opportunity to put something on a site that was actually respectful of all of the elements of a site.
But if it had to be that site, because that's what we're talking about today, what in your mind could be used to reconcile that building on the site?
Well,
if anything.
I don't think the site should result in the destruction of part of the cemetery. I think it needs another site.
Any other questions? No. Thank you very much, Scott Garland, for your presentation. Thank you. And now we move on to the applicants. And we have a number of them here with us from the Department of Human Services, Rick Sesson and Simon Dunn. We have Damien Rogers, is an architect, and also Matt Clark, a planner. So would you like to all come front seat, please? Have 5 minutes, but if you want to break it up among yourselves, or hopefully the elected members will ask questions, then we'll be able to have a bit more time to clarify.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Shane Gregory. I'm the Associate Secretary of the Department of Health. You'll note that my name wasn't on the list that you read out. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge Dr. Snowden as an eminent historian and advocate for the historic values of St John's Park. We're very supportive of her work. We have supported a nomination to the heritage listing, and we have also supported the From the Shadows work, and we made a financial contribution and worked with Dr. Snowden around the placement of the shadows and the very successful unveiling of those a couple of years ago. So we're very, very strong supporters of her work. We recognise the important historical value of this site, and as our previous speaker has mentioned, there is a long history of care on this site, both good and bad. And that care continues. It has gone from some very poor practices in colonial days through many iterations of changes in healthcare and different buildings going on the site. It is a bit of a mishmash of buildings on the site at the moment. Some very good and attractive buildings and some very poor ones built in the 60s and 70s. we want to put another care on this site, a really important high demand care at the moment in terms of mental health. This is one of the major issues in our communities at the moment, and the ability for us to provide a good, sound, safe mental health care is critically important. In terms of what can be done on this site and what's available, I've heard a number of people say there are alternative sites. Some of the sites that have been mentioned up on the hill and the tennis court are not on land owned by the department. And there are, yes, there are other buildings on the site, and in the broader picture of where we're going with the master plan, we'd like to see a lot of the inappropriate buildings taken off the site, the Carruthers building, the Ingham building, the old kitchens. We think these are completely inappropriate for this site, recognising the heritage value and going into the future. We believe that this development on this particular location, a quite highly disturbed location that previously had workshops, we believe that this is appropriate, it is manageable. The reality is nobody knows the full extent of the cemetery. The investigations we've done to date suggest that the probability of us finding a burial on this site is not particularly high, but if we did, there would be appropriate procedures and processes to manage that. So we think this is an appropriate development. It's a very important development for the delivery of healthcare to Tasmanians, and we think it should proceed. We've heard about conservation management plans. As part of the bigger picture process around the master plan, we will be updating the conservation management plan. We will to do further archaeological investigations and further interpretation and documentation of the history on this site, and we'd certainly hope that Dr. Snowden would join us in that process as we go through the master plan. I've heard that people are saying, well, why are we doing this without a master plan? The master plan is born out of some decisions we made in reviewing the Royal Hobart Hospital master planning and recognising that there were significant limitations on the repat site, and St John's Park provides an opportunity to continue delivering quality health care and opening up the site and recognising its heritage value and making it more publicly accessible. That decision came well after the funding commitment for the new mental health facility. So that's why they're out of sync. We don't believe that it's in the best interest of Tasmanians to hold this project while we complete a master plan, when the master plan, we've already penciled in that this is the site and this is where the first component of our build would occur. So we believe that all the elements of the site can be recognised, that we can deliver this development. It may not sit comfortably with everybody and who visits the site and all the stakeholders, but we believe it is a critical project for us to get on the ground and deliver services to the most vulnerable people in our community, people suffering from mental health, and in particular people suffering from eating disorders, which is traditionally our younger next generation coming through.
You have 30 seconds left.
I would wrap up on that point, Chair, that we think this is critically important. We think it can be managed, and we would be very responsive to any issues that come up during construction and to resolving those.
Thank you very much for your representation. Councillor Harvey.
You suggested it's not particularly high probability of finding graves in the construction zone. Could you just clarify that to us in a bit more detail, why it's not highly probable?
Well, I'll pass over to our team who've been involved in the investigations, but I would note that there was a workshop built on this site and stood on this site for many, many decades. So it is in comparison to other parts of the burial ground, it is highly disturbed. But I would pass over to the team that's been involved in the investigation.
That's passed over to me. Based on back in 2017, Liminal and Ford Consultancy undertook a review of the development area or of the precinct and prepared a development analysis report for the department. Part of that indicated or identified 13 potential development sites within the precinct. Now, that was That report was actually circulated to Heritage Tasmania and to the council, and comments were received from them on that. From that point, X Squared were taken on board as architect in 2018 to design the St John's Precinct project, and as well as the sister site, the Peacock Centre. At that time, X Squared and Praxis, the Heritage Consultants, undertook a further review of those 13 sites, and from that they identified 3 sites out of those 13 that were potential development sites. The 3 were the existing bowling club site, the site that we're on now, and then the one across the road, which was the 3 bungalows, which I think is on the edge of the properties. So it was decided to, at that time, to go with the workshop site because it had been built on before. Part of the process of making those assessments, Brad from Praxis had undertaken desktop studies, looked at sort of past aerial photos, the GHD ground survey that was undertaken, and from that a diagram as such was created for the burial ground area, which sort of indicated areas that had a higher likelihood of burials, sort of a mid likelihood of burials and a low likelihood of burials. And the area where we, from that sort of research, the area where we have placed the site or placed the building is within that sort of area of lower likelihood because it's up on the hill. It's harder ground. From the geotech reports that we've had, rock is very, very close to the surface. So, and there's anecdotal evidence of it taking the grave diggers, if you had to dig up in that area, it took too many days to dig a hole. So, a lot of the times, a lot of the burials, and from the aerial photos, are more down towards the lower portion of the burial grounds. So that's why that was chosen. That's why we've placed it in that zone.
And can I one more follow up? With the probability that there could be burials there, what would happen if you did discover some remains?
There is a. Sorry, Brad, I have to refer to yourself there. What happens if there was
so the archaeological method statement makes provision for if there are burials encountered, but then goes over the Burial and Cremations Act. So there's a whole process under that Act, which is outside the planning system, which would need to be followed.
Any other questions? Deputy Lord.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to know, just with regards to the comments that have been made previously by the deputations tonight. Have you reached out any further to the Apalawa community or anyone from the Aboriginal community, and were you willing to? I understand you may have tried to contact, or were you going to? Sorry.
I was going to say, originally, when I first started the project, which was like 4 years ago, there was, we did reach out and we heard nothing back. Since then, that sort of side of things has been taken over by the department.
That's right. And also part of our stakeholder engagement plan identifies the list of stakeholders, and the Aboriginal organisations are listed in there. I can note that the 3 that have been reached out, and there's ongoing sort of conversation, and that was Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania, Tas Aboriginal Heritage Council, and the Tas Aboriginal Centre. So between the master plan team and also the project, in conjunction together, we're both the ongoing correspondence and hoping to get further consultation moving forward.
just I suppose the overview of those conversations? Like,
the conversation is more as a reach out for support or advice moving forward, especially in regards to the master planning, and then also the informing of the current process of the project as well. So obviously the application, development application.
Councillor Bloomfield, Alderman Bloomfield, sorry.
We went and did the tour yesterday. It was very interesting to see that this position, I believe, was on the rise and that it looked down over, I think, part of where they think the graves are. But in particular, I would be right in saying that the area we're actually discussing today is actually a car park. But we currently drive cars, park cars over these argued grave sites, which is hardly sympathetic, personally, at all. So whatever I think this does, especially since you will be doing further, there's sonar work and there'll be all different things to establish before you complete. I think this is probably the most respectful thing that's occurred to this area in some time. But I would just like to confirm, though, that the area itself is not just a car park, it's actually something that's going to be further looked at, so that, that before the ground is effectively established, ready for building, there'll be absolutely no stone left unturned, literally, that there will be no graves left. Would that be about right, or it'd be unlikely or highly unlikely, or?
Well, I think the reality of that is until you break ground and start to work through, you cannot be absolutely certain. I don't think there's any way of being absolutely certain. Ground penetrating radar will tell you where there's been a disturbance in the soil profile. It won't tell you what that is. Even you can draw conclusions from that, and if you do ground penetrating radar down through the bulk of the burial site, the cemetery, which has been done, in all likelihood those disturbed areas that are rectangular shapes will be graves. I think the likelihood of getting that sort of information out of this very disturbed ground is probably low, but it's going to be a matter of a sensitive approach to the excavations, and if anything is discovered, then work ceases, and that's...
Any other questions, Deputy?
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry, I just had one further question. So we received some information, I think it was also said before, that there was no community consultation. Could you just clarify if there was community consultation, and if there was, what did you do?
The previous, I suppose, the previous iterations of the design, because this has been through a number of iterations over the years, including, I think, 2 deeds that have been previously lodged but retracted. There was discussions with Heritage Tasmania on both on those occasions, and also I presented to the Friends of the Orphan School, I think the previous iteration, and I believe Peter Scott and Brad had discussions with the Friends as well, and met with, and I met with Dr. Snowden at X Squared with Peter a couple of times.
So this is the third version? That's right, is it? Okay.
Councillor Lumberger.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question that was slightly related to Alderman Bloomfield's question. The site's currently a car park. It did used to have buildings on it. I mean, I walked through there quite a lot. The buildings have been demolished, I believe. Was the demolition of those buildings sort of part one of this actual project? Were they specifically demolished to put this new building on this site?
Yes, they were.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Councillor Passot. Councillor Passot first, and Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Does the proponent, do you recognise the significance of the site, and do you agree with the comments that were made earlier by the Trust that this site has the potential for UNESCO listing?
Well, I can answer that question. The first component is, do we recognise the importance of the site? Yes, we do. As I said in my opening statement, we strongly support the work of Dr Snowden and the Friends of the Orphan, and we supported an application for heritage listing. I'm not qualified to comment on whether this has UNESCO heritage value. That would simply be speculation.
To follow up with that, given that we do have experts who think it is of that higher calibre, are the principles of the Borough Charter important that we follow on this site? And in your own assessment, do you think that you are following the principles of the Borough Charter in the way that this particular development application has come to us tonight?
Borough Charter?
Look, all I can really speak on is the documentation that I've provided in terms of the Historic Heritage Management Strategy and the Archaeological Impact Assessment. They do specifically cite the Borough Charter. They have included background from the Conservation Management Plan, the Liminal Architecture Plan and other previous documentation. So within the scope of what I've done in terms of this application, it has followed Borough Charter process.
Thank you. And the final question, Chair. You identified, when you were looking for a site for this within the St John's precinct, you identified 13 sites, and that was distilled to 3. Were those 13 sites confined to Department of Health land, and was there any consideration given to talking to the land managers of other publicly owned land within the precinct during that site search?
I am unsure of whether those 13 were all within the property owned by Health. I'd have to refer back to that report. I believe that the study was of the greater area of St John's. In fact, I know it was because there was 2 different lines. The reason why we reduced those down to sort of the 3 that we chose was to do with mainly a lot of the sites that were, the other sites were within view lines of the historical building. So, for example, the Vicarage, Gellibrand building, and also behind the orphan school. And there were some of the sites that were just too small for this type of building. So they were sort of noted that they were again, yeah, the area of them was just too small. So I think at the time, through those discussions that we'd had with Heritage Tasmania and with Council at that time, the 3 that we chose were the and resulting in this site, because it had the existing building on there, they felt that that was the best site. You know, it edged what was believed to be the burial ground, and it had been undisturbed previously. So,
Councillor Kelly.
Actually, my question's been answered.
Thank you. Councillor Kitsos.
Look, my question's in relation to the discovery of human remains, or the possibility that that might happen while you're developing the site. I think it was the Burial and Cremations Act that was referenced as being something that would take over at that point. I mean, I imagine that if that was enacted, that would cause considerable delay to the project, and just wondering if you've thought about what that might look like for your development should there be the discovery of human remains.
I think yes, that is always, and that is sort of something that we've indicated in our risk management plan that we put to our client, that even though we've done all of these studies, we noted that there was a low risk of finding finding burial or remains on the site. And because we've tried to keep the footprint of the building over the existing or over the previous footprint of the workshop building, we felt that that would be lesser likelihood of finding burial or any remains in that zone. And I'm assuming, well, we put the risk management strategy to the department, and we were told to continue. So I think they understand that.
I think recognising there is a risk that we might find something, that is a risk with every build. Even though you might perceive to be a greenfield site. My experience is extensively in transport infrastructure, and it is an issue that you face on every project. Every time you turn the site, you don't know what you're going to find, and your best intentions in terms of how much effort you've put into pre-construction investigations, Aboriginal heritage, environment, built heritage, you can do so much. But every project you do runs that risk, that you find something that's unexpected. It might not be a heritage item, it might be a latent condition in the ground that is different to what you expected it to be. That is simply a risk you manage. It's a risk that's been realised for the Hutchins School at the moment in one of their builds, and you manage that and you work your way through it.
For you, Chair, just to put a bit of clarity in this, I'm going through this exact process of doing an excavation where Aboriginal artefacts, not bodies, have been found. And just to put everyone in the picture, that's happened. The Aboriginal Heritage Council, which is there to report to the Minister. Ultimately, the Minister Minister Jance has the total say at the end of the day. It also goes to, that's the Aboriginal Heritage Council, it goes to Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania, and that's the Aboriginal community who look at all this, and they give the Aboriginal Council a report saying what their thoughts are on it. Now, quite often, that report, it could be that in a case scenario out at Newtown there, Aboriginal remains are found. That process goes through to Aboriginal Heritage Tasmania. They say this should not proceed because
Councillor Kelly, could you ask the question, please? You could use all that information in the debate with me.
So, I was just giving a point of clarification, though.
It's information. You say. You ask the question.
And I will ask questions in the background of that. So, just as you understand the situation too, that ultimately the Minister is the person who will give you permission on that?
Ultimately, there are ministers with coverage of certain acts and legislation, yes, but the whole process is about, do very thorough investigations, as thorough as you can, to understand what you're dealing with, recognising that you won't know everything that you can possibly know. The odds are you will discover something. And then you work through what's the best response plan to that. Now, there are cases, yes, where ministers can say, no, I'll give permission for that value to be relocated or, in extreme circumstances, destroyed, but that's certainly not how you approach. You don't approach a public infrastructure project with the view that if you find a heritage value, you'll get approval to destroy it. That's not how we go about it.
But as you understand it, it is the Minister who will have the final say based on reports given to him or her.
It's the Minister can make that.
Whether people want not to continue or not, the final say will be the Minister. Is that correct, I think?
That's my understanding of the legislation.
Any other questions? No. I have a question. It's a planning question, but because you have a planner in there, let me just ask the question. With regards to the nearby buildings, where the proposed construction is going to be built, how far in meters is the Sunday school building and the other tall building, which is a laboratory, I think? Would you know the distance?
Nearest building would be the current forensic laboratories, and they would probably be 20, 30 metres away.
Yeah, 20, 30 metres.
Yeah, the old NRE laboratories would be 70 metres, something like that, 60, 70 metres at a guess. And the Sunday school would have to be 100 metres. That building's on to the opposite side of the open ground.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Passell.
Thank you. One final one on the conservation management plan. You've referenced that you are considering updating it as part of the master planning process, the ongoing master planning process. When do you have that process commenced to review the current conservation management plan, and if not, when do you think it will commence and be completed?
Well, I'd have to take that question on notice because the team that's running the master plan's not here.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. Do you have any questions to the Deputy Director before we move that item, or someone can move it?
Just a question, if there is an issue in regards, once they start digging, that becomes a building issue, doesn't it? When it has to go to, if it comes in under the other act?
Through you, Chair, if you are referring to finding remains of a body, that is a Burials and Cremation Act issue. So yes, there is a separate process.
Comes under the building code, not planning.
Well, it's a completely separate process even from building. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions? Councillor Kelly.
So with this application, is the height something that doesn't comply with the planning scheme for this area?
Through you, Chair, this application doesn't comply with the acceptable solution. We've done an assessment against the performance criteria and we are satisfied that it does meet the planning scheme.
So would that be contestable, do you think, in a TASCAT?
Through you, Chair, I have not made inquiries, but I don't have much confidence that we would find a plan to support a refusal on that ground.
Thank you.
Any other question? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a question that related to something Dr. Snowden said. E13.5 and the reference to conservation management plans. Can you talk to Diane Snowden's comments at all?
Through you, Chair. So the planning scheme has documents that are mandatory, and then it has enabling provisions which says that we can ask for further information, and then there is a legislative regime which says we can ask for further information if we need it to assess. The heritage officers were satisfied in the circumstances that they didn't need a conservation management plan and it wasn't lodged as part of this application. Just bearing in mind that the key concern from our heritage team was the built form. The site is not protected by an archaeological layer. So the issues to do with the burial ground, I appreciate that they may have been addressed in some of the documentation, but they were not relevant for our heritage officers to assess.
Follow-up question, does a conservation management plan entail more than reference to the archaeological aspects, and would it take more consideration into aspects such as the distance to the Sunday school and the siting within the broader site?
You would expect a comprehensive analysis of the heritage issues relating to the site. For some sites that's highly relevant and we do need it to assess, and for others, in this case, the heritage officers were satisfied that they didn't need that document.
Final question, was there any commentary from planners, the professional council planners that assessed this application, about planning controls on this particular site, given some of the sensitivities, whether or not our planning controls are relevant, up to date? Was there any commentary to that effect?
Through you, Chair, there's nothing contained in the report to that effect. There have been discussions between me and the assessing officers about, sometimes you look at these applications and you think the scheme might provide further protection, such as having an archaeological layer, and even down to the zone. This zone is quite a broad natured zone and allows different types of development. In an ideal world, perhaps you would have something slightly more tailored to the unique provisions of this site. The reality is that's not in place at the moment, and we have the current scheme to assess it under.
Any other, Councillor Hunt?
So through you, Chair, if this was to construct another workshop, for example, to replace the previous workshop, would it have been treated the same as it has been as a health facility?
Through you, Chair, I wouldn't want to speculate on and second guess what the heritage officers might think of that. They did pay careful attention to the placement of the monument
But the nature of the development, is that significant to it being approved?
Through you, Chair, it's the use itself is a discretion. So the classification of the use is hospital services, and that is assessed by the planners and recommended for refusal. As I just mentioned, the zone doesn't have a great deal of guidance in terms of what's acceptable in this sort of area, but based on what is in the zone purpose statements, we do think it satisfies the scheme.
Okay. Yep.
Any other questions? Councillor Passot.
Has there ever been a desired future character statement or local area objective for St John's Park?
Chair, I might just take a moment to find the provisions. Chair, I'm not able to provide tonight a historical previous schemes, but there are zone purpose statements which have been referred to in the report, which are fairly broad, as I said, and certainly don't have any suggestion that this isn't the sort of use that would be appropriate for this site.
Any other? Councillor Luberg.
I think we've finished questions, Chair. I was just going to move the item.
I have a question, if you don't mind, please. Okay. Yeah. Just a question with regards to the nearby buildings. What is the definition of nearby buildings?
So I might just consult with my colleague on that one. Chair, I would just need a moment to look at that. I'm not sure that that's called up by the specific scheme provisions, but I'll just take a moment to have a look.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, that is indeed called up by the height assessment. So this proposal must be compatible with the scale of nearby buildings. Do we have a definition in here? The report does refer to some of the buildings which are nearby, but I'm not sure that there's a definition in here for you.
So can I just then have a follow-up question then? Is it correct to say that most of the buildings, nearby buildings, are just one story or two story?
Through you, Chair, yes, that is correct.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Luberg, Councillor Alderman Bloomfield, you want to ask a question? Or?
Yeah, no, I did, because when we went up there was a multi-storey building just to that side. That was a research or something.
Department of Agriculture building.
Department of Agriculture. That wasn't single story. That was
the majority.
Yeah, but they were far, far away comparatively. The nearest building was that one, and that was multiple story, about maybe 3.
The questions have been answered by the director. Any other questions? Councillor Luberg, you want to move the item?
Certainly, I would like to move the item, Chair, as recommended by the staff. I am a very strong supporter of heritage, to be honest, but in this particular case I'm not convinced that that particular site retains as much of the heritage as it could, simply because of the absolute mishmash of very ugly buildings that are already on the site. I also am aware that there are a large number of areas around the city that are former cemeteries. I mean, there was my old primary school, Campbell Street, which has 5,000 people were interred in that graveyard before the primary school was built. We've got St David's Park, Hutchins School and Queenborough Oval, Friends Park in West Hobart, the Windsor Court Housing Development in Harrington Street in Hobart, St Andrews Park, Church Street on Trinity Hill. all of these are former cemeteries. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a much-needed facility, and while it's not an easy decision for me, I just think we need to prioritise the living over the dead here, just as we have already done with numerous parks and schools around Hobart. So I will be voting for this particular motion. Thank you, Chair.
Any other? Alderman Bloomfield.
To be honest, when I did the tour, it helped a great deal to understand the context of this application. Because when you go there, you realise that the current state of the identified area is as abandoned as those babies and children that are buried there. And the few trees and the grasslands that is left have not really been nurtured or anything significantly to really give any empathy or sympathy or any reconciliation to what actually occurred. And the fact that this new facility, the DA, actually triggered, I believe, a structural plan which will actually finally allow something to be developed to nurture and develop something that actually recognises these children and these babies is actually something wonderful. It doesn't take away from the fact that possibly we may find bodies buried in this area, but ultimately, remember too, this area is actually currently a car park. We are driving cars in the mud over these very children, so if they're there. So frankly, I feel that in order to embrace this area, to do something wonderful, to do something good, I actually think this DA is a very positive step forward, and I do hope that, I hope that we do not find anyone buried in that area. I do. But I equally hope that the way this building actually is developed, it's on a rise. It kind of curves around and embraces, looking down over the slopes where these children are, which one would hope with the structural plan will develop gardens at last, because there is currently almost nothing there. This would be an incredibly positive development on many, many levels. So as far as I'm concerned, I feel this is something to embrace and feel that we are doing something good by allowing this DA. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, this has really been an interesting debate. I've driven around this site numerous times over the years, looking at the heritage of it. I've talked to people about the burial ground, and I've always equated St John's with some other really important sites. Willow Court, Female Factory, Port Arthur. Willow Court's just sitting there unused. Female Factories, not much of that left. Port Arthur, it's a premier tourist attraction, but St John's is the heritage buildings there, the church, the orphan school, Kickstart Arts have been using those buildings for a number of years, so it's still a living building, which I don't see in Willow Court. And sadly, Willow Court, the surrounds of Willow Court have been neglected for a couple of decades, and that's quite appalling. But I'll be supporting this development tonight, but I still feel that there's a need for a connection between the past and the future. There's something missing there. It doesn't sit right with me, as I tried to explain last night. But I do see the urgent need for this health facility. This is a very good site for it, I think. Sadly, that it does potentially encroach on a burial ground that holds a lot of significance for the Palawa people, and I recognise the history of that area, the orphans that had a traumatic experience being taken there, and many of them were neglected and died and buried in the grounds that are adjacent to and potentially under some of the development that will be going ahead. I feel sad that we've lost two really significant trees. One was chopped, had its canopy chopped off, less than a year ago, which caused a lot of trauma, I believe, on that tree, which is now nearly dead. And the other one also, and I just confirmed today the age of those trees with other experts, and they assured me categorically that these trees are 200 years old plus. So these are trees that have been there for longer than was written up in the report, I believe. But they're both doomed. One's already nearly dead and the other one's in the way. That's sad. A dendrologist would be able to tell you the exact age of those trees if we cared to get one in and take a core out of those trees. They'll be able to count the rings and tell you exactly how old they are. But we will find out the accurate age when they're cut down finally. So I'd like to think that that's something we can keep up our sleeve to say, well, can we check in the future how old exactly those trees were? Because that'll help inform us about the other trees on the site that are remnant trees from the past that would have been significant remnant trees that connected the Newtown rivulet through to the domain. But anyway, those Viminalis trees, and looking into the future, we'll never see those sort of trees again, even though the recommendation says we're going to plant 2. But no one's going to be around 200 years. Those trees won't be in humanity, maybe in a different state in 200 years. We may not even, anyway, I won't go there. But overall, I think the development is an important development for the health of people in Tasmania, so I'll support it based on that. And I would like to, and I'll repeat it again, I would like to think that from a healing perspective, that this site needs to recognise and acknowledge the connection to the past in some way that helps the facility be that true healing, peaceful place that we hope it can be and that's been talked about. With the surrounds in a natural environment, and the care that people will get there is augmented by the surrounds around the buildings.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'll preface my debate tonight by saying that I will be supporting the application. I'll be doing my job and supporting the application. And I say that again because I'm angry. I'm really angry about this application. I'm angry because we need a mental health facility to service our community. But this application to me seems careless. It seems lazy and it seems disrespectful to what has been on the site before it. I'm angry that we don't have anything within our scheme that has the protections for our Aboriginal artefacts, for a place where we know the stolen generation originated from, for a place that we know had Aboriginal children in unmarked graves. And yet we work within the planning scheme to approve the application for this much needed development. I find those two things very difficult to align. I would really like to see a genuine effort in truth-telling on this site, more than just an offer of artwork. I was appalled on the site tour to see the blank faces when we discussed what consultation had taken place with the Indigenous community. I'm tired of hearing statements like reach out and stakeholder engagement. I think that we need to have this more firmly at the front of our minds, right across our legislative arrangements, that these are the things that should come first when we're thinking about developing a site as historically significant as this, not last as an afterthought and an offer of an artwork. I'm perplexed as to why this development application has been submitted prior to the finalisation of the master plan. I understand the urgency and the need for a state-of-the-art mental health facility in Hobart. I don't question that at all. As an occupational therapist who's worked in mental health, I understand this. But I think that it points to the ad hoc nature of the proposal. We've heard that this is the third version that has come to council or come to the organisation. And yet we hear that we don't want to delay this version because of the pressing need in the community, despite the fact that it's now been identified that we need a whole precinct plan to respectfully address the heritage issues in this site. And I think there is real concern that this delay for the community with this much needed facility may prove to be problematic if it turns out that there are human remains on this site, which begs the question, why wasn't another site looked at where these delays could be more understood and avoided? So I've put a lot of thought into what I would say tonight and which way I would vote. I'll be voting for this development, but my heart is heavy and I hope that in the future we can find a better way to protect our heritage sites. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I congratulate the applicant on the work with this. At the site visit yesterday, it was really good to hear the logic between getting these vulnerable people out of a hospital institutionalised situation into a serene, nice environment like it is out at St John's Park there. And I was very heartened to hear that. And the facilities in the building being new, no doubt, will be excellent. I put a real lot of emphasis on the Urban Design Advisory Panel. Now, and I'll talk about that in a second, but the things that ring loud in my ear are some of their comments, and I'll quickly touch on them. The building would be setting a precedent on this site and located in an area of high visibility. The panel conveys the impression that there is something in the design that feels disjointed and is visually intrusive. The panel feels that the building design has not considered well enough the heritage and landscape context of the overall St John's precinct, leaving the building feeling a little disjointed. They also comment how emphatic that about the master plan. They go back to that comments about not having the master plan to couch that against with the whole design. I am a bit, I'm concerned a bit that perhaps the Aboriginal community could have been consulted that a little bit more. I know there can be complications with that. But look, all of what I just said there actually doesn't really stack up in the planning scheme. It's advice, it's for us to consider, but to hang your hat on that and go to TASCAT, it won't stack up. It will stack up on the question I did ask the Director previously about the height. Now, if you contextualise that in the whole part of it, it's the bulk, height and scale that does not plan. It's the only hook really with the planning scheme. And look, I'm for the development out there. I just think the sheer height and scale of it, it's a ripple effect from that. It's not just that standing there by itself. We've heard tonight too how, so what, it's a burial ground, there's heaps of them, but this is more than a burial ground. It's about all those incredible buildings in that precinct that no one's really talked about. Just the avenue leading up to it, turning left into it, you've got the orphan school, you've got the, and those old buildings there, and beyond just up the hill there, there's just some incredible architecture and the precinct of that. I would support a building of a lower profile, bulk and scale, which is contestable in the planning scheme. However, it is with such a heavy heart that I cannot support this application in its current form. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll preface by saying that I have still not made up my mind, and I am still listening to the debate, and at the end of my contribution I will continue to listen and see which way I go. So this is a site that we've heard from National Trust is a site that probably has UNESCO World Heritage Site qualities akin to Port Arthur, and the notion of building a large health service building on Port Arthur wouldn't fly with anybody in the community, but we have a DA in front of us and we need to assess it under the provisions of the planning scheme. But there are major concerns I have with process about how this development application has come to us. I feel that the lack of following the principles of the Borough Charter as I understand them, I'm not a heritage expert, I'm not a planner, but as I understand them, is concerning on a site like this, where conservation management plans and master planning processes should precede all development plans in principle. And neither of those have occurred, and we have yet another ad hoc development to the St John's Park precinct before us. I think that some of the sites that were raised by experts in this specific site that lie outside of health should have been investigated. It doesn't matter, in my view, that areas of this land are not controlled by health. The entire precinct is public land, and conversations could have been had to potentially find a more appropriate site. I think that the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre will have issues where, if this is approved this evening, and there will be more to play out. I do think that the burial ground component for the planning scheme, as cited by Councillor Lohberger, is relevant, that this is kind of something that we're going to have to deal with. It's certainly dealt with all through Europe all of the time. Burial grounds are problematic, but we have mechanisms to deal sensitively with them. But to my mind, it's more about the siting on this historic precinct, the effects on the orphan school itself, the church, and in particular the Sunday school, bearing in mind as well that the Forster Monument is listed, which will obviously have a massive impact over, and it sits looming on the top of the hill over this entire heritage precinct. And that's really concerning to me for what it means for the future of that precinct. And I will reference Councillor Kelly's remarks that this is a bit of a domino effect. So the only building that has been referenced in regards to height is the NRE Labs building. Now we come in and we allow for another building that's a little bit taller, sits a little bit more proud on the hill, and that building becomes the reference point for the next one. Without the NRE building there, I don't believe that this would have a chance of meeting the performance criteria of height in the urban mixed zone. And I think that Councillor Dutta raises very valid questions about the definition of nearby, because we have an argument in front of us that NRE is close enough to use as a nearby reference point, but the orphan Sunday school is not, and they're separated. Their distance from the development is no more than 50 metres in difference. And I don't think we have clarity over what nearby means. So with all of that debate had, you know, I think that what I would like to see from developers that are government developers, it doesn't matter if it's health or DSG or anyone, is that they should be model developers. When council undertakes legal proceedings, we try to be the model litigant and do the right thing. And I don't think that the right thing has been done here. Should I vote against this, it will be on the grounds of urban mixed zone height, D15.4.1, performance criteria 1. But I am still not convinced of which way I will vote, and I will continue to listen to debate. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
I've got a question with regard to the architects for the Peacock Centre, which is a similar facility. Who were the architects there?
Through you, Chair, X Squared.
Same architects for this development?
Through you, Chair, X Squared did start doing this project, and then it's moved on to a subsequent architecture firm.
Okay. But just from a quality perspective, I've been impressed with the Peacock Centre rebuild after it was destroyed. The additional elements of that as well, plus the restoration of some of the other heritage features like the atrium and things. So I could assume, I'm hoping, and fingers crossed, that we do get the quality of architecture, you know, the finish, like the Peacock Centre received. Yep.
Any other speakers?
To speak again, there was just something more I wanted to mention. In November last year, we assessed and approved a facility at Gregson Street, which is right next to St John's Park, and it is a health facility. And during that debate, there were numerous comments made that this facility probably should go onto St John's Park because it was actually just outside it. I just wanted to remind the rest of the planning committee about that particular debate, because now we have a building on St John's Park and there's people looking at rejecting it, another health building. So I just remind the planning committee about that last debate that we had in Gregson Avenue. Thank you, Chair.
Any other speakers? No.
Oh, sorry, yes, thank you.
Deputy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Look, I just wanted to, I suppose, just really commend Councillor Harvey and Councillor Kitsos on their very heartfelt overview, I suppose, around how they felt about this particular application. And I do myself also feel very much torn, like Councillor Posselt as well, about what to do with this particular application and which way to go. And I do also have a heavy heart understanding and considering the all of the aspects that we talked about in the past that have occurred on this particular site. And I won't labour that point because I'll probably just end up getting emotional, so I'll just talk about something a little bit more planning related. I think it's point 9 and 12 that we received from Dr. Snowden. It's unfortunate, as she points out in her email, that obviously she notes that the burial grounds are not just an archaeological issue at point 9, and she also noted that the assessment from the Cultural Heritage Officer does not recognise the open spaces of the burial ground as a landscape element with defined boundaries, and nor is there consideration of the burial ground as a heritage entity. It is not just a place where there are human remains. And as we've been advised already, the assessment of the burial ground is not something that can be done by the planning authority due to the provisions of our planning scheme. It is, however, it has been considered by the Heritage Council, and as we've been advised to have a look at that on page 299 of the application. So as I go into talking about something that's really only about the planning scheme, to try and understand and rationalise in my mind why it should be okay to approve this. I think when we look at page 299, it talks about the area defined as the proposed contractor compound on BPSM drawing, REVC, must be archaeologically investigated to determine where there are any unmarked burials within the development site. And in the event that any burials are identified and human remains cannot be left undisturbed in situ, the remains must exhumed by controlled archaeological excavation and reinterred in a respectful manner within the burial ground. To achieve this, as the applicant has identified, there's an archaeological method statement that must be prepared, and the AMS must include A to D, provisions for the initial removal, an excavation strategy outlining the best practice approach to the recovery and analysis of human remains, a communication plan that includes provision of routine interim reports to the Heritage Tasmania Works Manager, and finally research questions that might be answered by scientific analysis of the human remains and associated material culture. And it does go on to further discuss other points from up to E and F, and the other things that need to be done. I too, with a heavy heart, will be approving this particular application, but I do want to ask, is there anything that we can condition for the applicant to further liaise with the Tasmanian Aboriginal community, and perhaps something that Councillor Kitsos suggested, not just something that's in art form, but something meaningful on the site. Is it possible to condition anything of that nature?
Through you, Chair, the Tasmanian heritage conditions do already require a strategy for the interpretation of the burial ground, its cultural heritage significance. I think we could add on to the permit as advice that there's broad consultation in relation to that statement.
Yeah, that would be great. Could we add that? Thank you.
Any other speakers? No? But sorry.
Sorry, Chair. Just wanted to question on conservation management plan and whether or not we can condition that an updated conservation management plan be completed prior to works, or if it can only be an advice.
Through you, Chair, I don't think there's a sufficient basis for that to be a condition, but we could include it as advice.
Thanks. I'd like it included, please.
Any other question? No. Thank you very much. Now, I am also in the same situation like many others. There's a great need for this, and I am moved on that basis of need for this place to be built. But occupying the chair and as a planning authority, putting that hat on, I have to look at this from a planning scheme. Now, when I look at this application and put it under the planning rules, under acceptable solution, it has failed on a number of counts. There's no doubt about it. On a number of counts, it has failed. And one classic example is the height, where the height should be 10 or 8.5, it's gone up to about 18. So objectively, that application put under the first criteria, as it were, acceptable solution, it has failed on a number of grounds. I then have to move this application under the performance criteria. And under the performance criteria, there are a number of questions for me. And the first one I want to bring up is this. But what is interesting is that clause 15.4.1 P1 on page 269 states, the building height must satisfy all of the following. Now, I draw your attention to the two operative words, the word must and the word all. Must, for me, is an imperative. It must, it's mandatory that it must satisfy in all of these elements. And all of these elements are A to D. In B, it states, the building height must satisfy all of the following. B, be compatible with the scale of the nearby buildings. Hence my question, what is the definition of nearby buildings? If you read the report by staff and the applicant's application evidence and the arguments, we have to take this building, which is bulk and height is quite high in that particular spot, and if you want to compare it, and you take the Sunday school in, we are told, no, you can't, because it's not nearby. It's about 70 meters away. But let's take into account the laboratory, which is quite high, and it's very high, and that's the only building, and hence my question, the majority of the building nearby are 1-story or 2-story. Now, if we are saying that we have to exclude the Sunday school building and not bring it in as a nearby building, then my answer to the question of the laboratory, which was 70 meters away, why are we bringing that in as a nearby building to compare being compatible in scale. Now, so the scale and with regards to this height, for me, using my discretion under performance criteria, does not satisfy. Point number 2, I look at clause E551P1 on page 272. Now, the number of vehicle movements has increased significantly, 571 per day, and that's huge from what it is required. Now, I have an argument for that as well, but I leave that at this point. But the other argument I want to bring here is with regards to parking. Now, what is interesting for me is that parking very clearly states that the requirement under the rule is 130. That's a requirement for parking spaces. The applicant is providing 65 parking spaces. Therefore, there is a deficit, a shortfall of 65 parking spaces. Now, they have done their own homework in the vicinity and saying that there are a number of parking places available in the vicinity and it'll be able to cater it. And they've done a survey, and the survey was done on Friday at 11:30 a.m. Now, my question is, why then? Why at that time? And what was the methodology to bring about that empirical evidence to my attention? However, under that particular clause, the parking spaces, for me, it fails as well. When you put that in and compare it with table 6.1 on page 277. Now, heritage is another issue that is of significance for me, but again, because it is not under the planning rule, I can't bring that as an argument. So for me, I will have difficulty supporting this on the planning grounds, which is with regards to height, as I've stated, clause 1541P1, and also parking, as it's stated with regards to on page 272. So I have difficulty with that under these particular rules that I have in front of me. Now, any other comments before I put this to vote?
I had a question, Chair, through you to the Director. During the debate about the Argyle Street building, I clearly remember that nearby was defined as 100 metres. It was set out in that debate, and that was regarding heights and the heights of buildings nearby and then compatibility. Is my memory correct there?
Through you, Chair, that may have been in a discussion about streetscape. I've actually just received a text from my helpful colleague, Ms Turner, who says nearby has been held by the tribunal to be close to. Is that helpful? So I think, different words can mean different things in different contexts. Our planners were satisfied, as I've said, acknowledging that there are mostly lower buildings, but there is that one more substantial building, and overall they're satisfied that the scheme is met.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, good point, Councillor Lohberger, and it was in the context of streetscape, yes, etc. I remember, and this doesn't take that into account. But the interesting thing is, I also looked at the tribunal to see if I could find a case to support the nearby, and I had difficulty. That's all. So under the rule, because it said it must. And it must satisfy all, and it doesn't for me. That's what I'm saying. Okay, I'll put the vote. Those in favour, as has been put, as recommended. Those in favour, put your hand, please. Against? 1, 2. Councillor Passot, you voted. Thank you. The recommendation did get carried. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation and being here. Thank you. It's really 7 in Councillor Should we take a break? I'm just wondering. It's close to nearly 7 o'clock. And Alderman Marty Zuko will have to leave at 7. So should we have a break for 15 minutes? Only one?
Smash through it.
We're going to keep going.
Okay.
If I go, you'll still have a quorum, won't you?
Yes, you'll have 8 through 3. Yeah.
7.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the next item. 6.1.1, the number 1 Maryville Esplanade.
Moved.
You have to move the recommendation.
Anyone to speak to? Any questions? No, I put that. Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Okay, let's look at 6.1.4, 365 Macquarie Street, partial demolition and alteration of the car parking.
I'll move that as well.
Moved. Anyone would like to speak to that?
Just a question. Can we condition replacement of the 4 metres, I believe, of fencing that was illegally removed as part of the approval?
Sorry, Chair, I might just need a moment to think about that.
I assume that'd be a civil matter between the parties and the neighbours' fence, wouldn't it?
Through you, Chair, boundary fences.
Boundary fence, yeah.
Yes, it usually is.
Even when they've breached the planning scheme to demolish it, though?
Through you, Chair, I am uncomfortable with a condition on that front. Boundary fences are a requirement, a separate requirement, and it hasn't been contained as part of this application, so requiring them to do additional work is a little bit beyond, I think, our powers tonight.
Advice clause that they replace the fencing in consultation with the neighbours?
I wouldn't want to get, yeah, you're getting involved.
Just advice.
Are you taking this on?
We'll add that in as advice.
Okay, we'll add that on. Thank you.
Who moved it?
Yeah, you did.
I did.
Thank you. All right, anyone else? Anyone to speak? I put that now. Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Let's move on to 7.1. State of Play Southern Tasmania Regional Land Use Strategy. Someone would like to move the report be accepted?
So moved.
Moved. Anyone with question, comments? No. Thank you. I put that to vote. Those in favour?
Wayne, what was the recommendation, Council?
Just proceeding in voting.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Carried unanimously. Thank you. 7.2 Planning. Someone move.
Yeah, it's a bit awkward that we've got to rush through things because we're afraid that the quorum's going to.
Don't be afraid.
No, I'm just saying, there's no one saying anything.
Rushing so fast.
Why would you say that? Point of order. Why would you say that?
No, it appears that we're rushing because...
staying here as well. I'll stay to midnight if you want.
The issue here.
Not a point of
Relax.
order. Can you rule on the point of order?
Chill, Bill.
Okay.
No, I'm just concerned we're going very fast, and I think that's because of the nature of this committee sometimes.
No, that's okay. That's fine. That's an opinion. I take that. Okay. Okay. Is there anyone who wants to speak to 7.1?
I had a couple of questions.
Questions?
Sorry, my computer's just frozen. I was just interested in a couple of 7.1. This is the advertised applications report, is it, or am I jumped again? It's right. No, I don't.
7.1. No. Any question? No. So I put that to vote. Then it's okay. It's carried. I understand. 7.2. Planning and.
Yes. I just had a question about number 2, which is a very large project. Spotlight. That is the Spotlight project. Okay. All right. So I guess just for the sake of people listening or watching, maybe through you, Chair, the Director or Assistant could talk to us about that one?
Certainly through you, Chair. So that is a very substantial application and that will be coming to the committee at the next meeting on the 31st.
Any other questions? And number 11, for the Russell Crescent Sandy Bay extension to restaurant trading hours, which what is the actual restaurant involved?
The old Wing & Co.
Right, just opposite Coles, yep.
Okay, I think it might be another big restaurant that already...
Any other questions?
We've got plenty of time, I can ask questions.
Any other comments?
Well, I'll just try to make one then. Yeah. Look, one of the... Anyway, you'll have to find out yourself now. Yep. Go on.
Councillor Ivey? Okay.
No, I'm done.
No,
yeah,
done.
I'm done.
All right, no, I'm giving everybody time to make sure there's no rush. Okay, someone would like to move that we receive noted. Yes, those in favour, those against, carried unanimously. 7.3, delegated decision report. Any questions, any comments? Any questions, any comments? Do you have more? I'll give you more time. Do you want more time? No? All right. Okay.
You're going through.
Someone want to move? All in favour? Aye. Carried. Questions without notice. Any questions? Councillor Fasol. Councillor Fasol.
Chair, given the nature of the debate this evening and the site that we've identified, what levers, policy options, planning controls, structure plans, etc., does the council have at its disposal under the acts, the relevant acts, to investigate the entirety of St John's precinct, St John's Park precinct, as bordered by Creek Road, Maria Street, the easement, the power line easement, and Newtown Road or Main Road, depending on how you read the map, to ensure that we have compliance with the Borough Charter and that we get the best development outcomes on this site moving forward.
Through you, Chair, it is hoped that in the next financial year there will be an item on the annual plan for a structure plan, so a neighbourhood plan for the Newtown area. We're currently undertaking a number of structure plans for other areas, and it is hoped that we'll be able to move into that the Newtown area, which would cover the area that you've mentioned. That will allow us to take a very broad approach about what sort of development is appropriate and desired by the community. It can then allow us to consider the relevant planning controls that would be used to implement those desired outcomes.
Thank you. And just supplementary to that, could we be provided in writing with options that are outside of the structure planning exercise that may be more expeditious?
Yes, I'll take that on notice.
I just had one question. Given the other debate that we did have on 51 Smith Street, I looked up what we were commenting on in the previous planning meeting, and that particular element, that particular DA, was actually to be done by the director, not by us. And I have no note here at all that we could have known that there were 5 or even 8 people who made deputations. So can you please tell me when we would have reasonably have known there were deputations and where we would have found that? Because it's obviously hadn't occurred in the meeting when we called it. So when exactly was that public or even knowledge to us? Because did they occur after our meeting or did they occur before? I just find it a little bit odd.
Through you, Chair, from memory it was on the advertised list at the last meeting, so you're correct in the sense that it was open for advertising, so at that point we didn't know how many representations there were going to be. And I do belatedly recall that Councillor Dutta said he would like to consider that application. So normally you would only find out the number of representations when you see an application on an agenda.
But in fairness, an application has more than 5 as specified would go to us, which meant it wouldn't have said director, correct?
Through you, Chair. So when we're compiling that list, if there's an obvious trigger, so council land which is not a road reserve or it's a major development or various other triggers, if we know that it's going to come committee, then we put that on the list. If we don't know and it would only be representations, then it's listed as director, but that would obviously flip over once we know how many representations there are.
So at that point in time, we did not know how many representations were going to be made.
Through you, Chair, correct.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? No? We'll put this all in favour.
Aye.
Those against? Carried unanimously. I'm waiting for someone to
Move that we go into closed.
Thank you. All in favour? Aye. Unanimously. Thank you very much.